If you're using lead scoring to pass leads onto sales, you need to think about more than whether they've visited your website or how many times they've downloaded ebooks. I'm going to show you how you can break up lead scoring into two different scores and use things like time bounds in order to pass along leads to sales that are truly ready for sales to reach out. HubSpot has a default HubSpot score property that you can use for lead scoring. However, it also allows you to create custom score properties. And I would recommend doing that because you can break up the criteria that you're using into multiple different properties. So you can see here, I've created two score properties. One is a behavioral score, which is going to show you, are people actually showing buying intent? The second is a firmographic score, which is going to tell you whether or not they are a fit for your ICP. In order to create a custom score property, you can just create a new property, select lead scoring, name it whatever you want, and then under field type, select score. This is going to bring you to a screen where you can build your score. I have already built some out, so I'm going to close out of this. Let's start with the firmographic score because it tends to be a little bit simpler and the criteria remain pretty static. So again, this score is going to show you whether this contact is a fit for your ICP. Do they work at the right kind of company? Do they have the right kind of job title? That kind of thing. So this information shouldn't really change very often unless someone changes jobs. You can see here, I've built in some criteria around the size of the company, the number of employees, various job titles. I've given 15 points if they have a job title that indicates they work in a department that would be a fit. And then I've got a larger 25-point score if they are in the C-suite. I've also got some geography built in here. So the IP country is going to look at their IP address. And if that is located in the United States or Canada, then it's a pretty clear indicator that they are located there as well, unless they're using a VPN. We should be able to filter out some people that don't work in areas that we service. And this is a really cool one. This web technologies property is a property on the company record that HubSpot automatically populates using its HubSpot Insights feature. So I've got this set to, if the associated company uses HubSpot, we're going to give them 20 points. I've got a little bit less if they use a competitor to HubSpot and don't use HubSpot. So potentially we can convince them that HubSpot would be a good thing to switch to. And then the last one is if they use HubSpot and Salesforce, that's a really good indicator for us because we can help them with that integration. In terms of negative scoring, you want to think about some of the same criteria that you're using on the positive side. For number of employees, say it's less than 50 employees, we may not want to work with them. It might just be too small of a company. If their annual revenue is less than $1 million, that also indicates they may not have the budget. So all of these are criteria that you want to think about when you are creating your ideal customer profile and then building a score around it. And one thing you want to think about is a threshold where if someone meets that score, you would consider them qualified. So in this case, we have 25 points here, 25 points there. This might be like a 50 or 75 point threshold where if someone meets enough of these criteria, they don't necessarily have to meet all of them. We would still consider them qualified. Moving on to the behavioral score, this is going to be a much more dynamic score that's going to change over time as a contact engages with your marketing, visits your website, and takes other actions that indicate buying intent. And I think buying intent is a really key phrase there. You don't want to just look at, are they engaging with your marketing? Because especially if you're doing content marketing, you have a lot of educational or instructional content. They could just be interested in the subject and not actually interested in your product or services. So if you'll look at the scores I've built out here, I have some pretty specific things that are geared towards seeing if someone is actually interested in what we're selling. If someone's filled out a request for a consultation, that is the clearest possible indicator we can have. We are going to give them a whole bunch of points for that. But you'll see here, I've got this set to less than 7 days ago. So this is going to help me understand how recently someone's activity is impacting their score. So if someone filled out this form in the last 7 days, they're going to get a whole bunch of points. If the last time they filled out that form was less than 30 days ago, then that's a little bit less points than if it was in the past week. But we still want to know that they took that engagement recently. And that can compound with some other scoring criteria. That way, if someone has activity that is important, but is longer than 7 days ago, we still want to surface it. The other thing to note is that these will stack. So if someone fills out a request a consultation form, they will get the score for 7 days as well as 30 days because both of those are within 30 days. You can see we've got some additional ones down here. You can also combine criteria. So for this, I wanted to look at whether they have clicked on marketing emails recently, but I don't just want to know if someone clicks on an email for the first time. I don't really care about that. But if they repeatedly click on emails and also have done it recently, then that becomes a better indicator. So here I'm looking at the number of marketing emails that they've clicked total, as well as a time bound of the most recent click. And again, you can see I'm giving the most points for the last 7 days, fewer points for less than 30 days ago. Another way to think about intent is to look at whether someone is actually visiting pages on your website that are specific to your services and or product. So if someone is visiting a blog post, they may or may not have any knowledge or interest in your products. But if they're visiting your product or services page, then that's a pretty clear indicator that they're at least interested in learning more about it. So here I've got set up has at least one page view of a URL that contains services less than 7 days ago. And you could replace that keyword services in here with pretty much anything. It's going to have to fit how you have your URL set up. This would be assuming that we have all of our services pages contain the word services. So that may not be the case for everyone, but you should be able to set up some sort of system where you are looking at keywords within the URL. Looking at some negative scoring criteria, again, I want to emphasize the idea of time bounds, trying to surface recent activity and giving negative points if there's not activity for a long time. So here I've got a last engagement date, and this takes into account a bunch of different criteria that HubSpot looks at, including email opens, web page visits, basically any activity that HubSpot can measure that contact actually took an action. So if this contact has not visited our site or opened an email or anything like that within the last 6 months, then we want to give them a pretty hefty amount of negative points, because that indicates that regardless of whether they are an ICP fit, they probably are not interested or are completely unaware that we exist. Another one to look at is if they've unsubscribed. While you may have contacts that are actively going to your website and engaging with sales that have unsubscribed from marketing emails, the action of unsubscribing is an action that indicates they're not interested. Now I'm going to show you guys a workflow that's just one example of how you could use lead scoring in your lifecycle stage automation. So you can see here, I've set up a trigger criteria for this workflow that takes into account both the behavioral score and the firmographic score. And we're looking at, again, this idea of a threshold. So they need to rise to a certain level of both scores before we would consider them a qualified lead. That means that they need to be actively engaging with your marketing material, showing actual buying intent, as well as fit within your ICP. And because we're looking at setting the lifecycle stage to marketing qualified lead, I've got another criteria here to only look at contacts that have an earlier stage. So if someone meets both of the lead score criteria and they're an earlier stage than MQL, then we're first going to check this custom property I built called marketing qualification. And this is a drop-down property that has 3 different options, which are qualified, nurture, and unqualified. Basically, qualified would mean that they are ready for sales reach out. Nurture means that they need to go back into the marketing funnel and potentially get some more activity going. And then unqualified would mean they are not a fit. They're probably never going to be a fit. We don't need them in our system. So this action is first going to check if that marketing qualification property has already been set. This is a property that could be manually set, so it could happen at any time. I'm going to start by looking at what happens if it's never been set, because everything else kind of falls within this flow. It's all actions that go into this flow. So if we don't know the marketing qualification, first thing we're going to do is set that lifecycle stage to marketing qualified lead. What I don't recommend is having a fully automated process for setting MQLs. Maybe if you are an extremely large company that operates at a high volume of leads, you might want to fully automate this process. But what I found is for most companies, it's important to have a manual checkpoint just to get an idea if the leads that you're passing along to sales are actually a good fit. So that's where this comes in. This is an internal notification that is just telling the marketing team, hey, a contact recently became an MQL. Please fill that marketing qualification property and ensure it's a good lead to pass to sales. Next, there's this really cool action called delay until event happens. So this is going to wait until a property value has changed or until 1 day has passed. So whichever one of those comes first, if marketing gets that notification and they change the property in 30 minutes, then it'll automatically move to the next step at that point. But if they don't get to it, someone's out of office, after 1 day, it will automatically move on to the next step so that these hot leads don't just sit and wait for someone. they're actively going to be passed to sales, regardless of whether that qualification is set. We're just going to treat them a little differently based on if that marketing qualification property was actually set. So that's where this if then branch comes in. This is just a follow-up to this delay until event happens. If the marketing qualification property was not set, then we're going to send a notification to sales that said, hey, there's a new MQL. Marketing did not have a chance to qualify it, so reach out at your own discretion. If marketing does get to the marketing qualification property and set that, then we're going to do another branch on that property. And if someone is qualified, we're going to send a notification to sales that says, hey, new MQL, this has been qualified by the marketing team. It's ready for reach out. If it's a nurture, we're going to set that contact property back to lead. And then we could potentially enroll them in a nurture workflow. And then with unqualified, we're going to delete that contact, get it out of our system. An alternative method you could use is to set them as not a marketing contact, and that will remove them from your counted marketing contacts, which you are charged for by HubSpot. And then if for whatever reason it thinks that qualification was set and then it's not, then it's just going to go to this no manual qualification action. So if we go back up here, it's pretty much the same for the rest of these branches as what we just saw down here. If they're already qualified, we're going to set the contact lifecycle stage to marketing qualified lead and then send that new MQL notification to sales. If it's nurture, then we're going to take it back through this whole flow because it could have been a previous contact that came through this flow. We mark them as nurture. They've engaged with more of our marketings and they meet the criteria again. So we're going to send them back through that flow and have marketing redo that qualification check to make sure they are ready for reach out now. And then unqualified, once again, we're just going to delete that contact. So by using a more complex lead scoring process where you split out a behavioral score and a firmographic score, you can improve the quality of the leads that you are passing to sales because they are actually going to be showing intent. They're going to fit your ICP and they're going to be ready for reach out instead of you sending along the leads whose last activity was 6 months ago. And by incorporating that lead scoring into your lifecycle stage automation, you can really free up a lot of your marketing team's time and you can get leads over to sales faster. Especially with this delay until event happens, it's going to make sure that leads don't just sit on the back burner. If they rise up to the level that they should be considered qualified, then it's going to get them over to your sales team within 24 hours. If you found this video to be helpful, please give us a like and a subscribe on YouTube. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn